All right, so this series is really based on, in spite of the footage there, really based on the original comic books. You know, because we get all these awesome movies now. I mean, well, let's be honest, some of the Marvel ones are, but and DC has always been. But we got the old. I mean the movies. You got to admit they've been. Wah, wah. So, but we've been going to the original comic book stories, and I love like the origin stories, and there's some cool stories in the comic books aside from the origin stories, but the origin stories are so cool, and it's cool to see once you've seen them depicted on screen to be like, oh, this is what it was back in the day when this was a new character. And so, in October of 1959, a strange space aircraft crash landed in the southwestern region of the United States. This is fictional, by the way, in case somebody's like, whoa, really? No, it's fictional. And in it was an alien, a humanoid alien with hot pink skin named Abin Sur. And he was fatally wounded, still living, but fatally wounded inside of this crash on Earth. And so his duty was to pass on a ring and also this lantern-looking thing that he has in his spacecraft. And he needs to find a successor on Earth before he passes away. And he never expected it to be on the planet Earth. But he's like, hey, you got to work with what you have. I got to get somebody on Earth. I have a duty to fulfill. And so the injured spaceman pressed his finger to the ring, his finger ring to the lantern-like object, and he said, battery of power, seek in this strange world, if there be a deserving one here. Seek and find, bring him to me. He must be one without fear, entirely without fear. Hurry, the time is short. And so from there, from this green ring, this like green energy source shoots out, and it actually encircles the entire Earth until it goes to Ferris Aircraft Company. And there is a test pilot whose name is Hal Jordan. And Hal Jordan he's in this little thing that he's, a test pilot. If we go to the next screen, next one. And, here we are. He's in this little, it doesn't even have wings. It's just for a test pilot, a simulation thing. But all of a sudden, it lifts in the air from this energy from the ring, and it starts pulling him to the site of the crash. And so he's jetting through the air, and he comes down next to this mysterious aircraft. And telepathically, the alien Abin Sur says, come in, Hal Jordan. And this is my favorite quote in the first issue, which again is from 19, what did I say? Was it 59? Yeah, just moments after I was born. Where my favorite quote is when Abin Sur telepathically says, come in, Hal Jordan. Hal thought, good gosh, a spaceman communicating with me by telepathy. So a little harsh language here with the good goshes. So, but anyways, Hal Jordan enters the ship, and telepathically Abin Sur introduces himself. He says, I am Abin Sur. I am not of this earth. Oh, the hot pink skin might have given that away. Either that or I thought you were Irish and just got back from Florida. But he's like, I'm from a distant planet far from Earth, and I'm dying. And he says, it's too late to help me, but I must speak to you of a more important matter. Look at this battery, Hal Jordan. And when he says that, Hal Jordan says, it looks like a green lantern. Aha, coming to America. He says, yes, in your words, a green lantern, but actually it's a battery of power given only to selected space patrolmen in the supergalactic system to be used as a weapon against forces of evil and injustice. The battery has already selected you as one born without fear. There is still much to tell you and only moments left. Take my ring, let me put it on you. With this ring, I thee wed. No, that's not what he said. With this ring, you will drain power from the battery, effective for 24 hours. And once you have the battery, you will have power over everything except what is yellow. Then Abin Sur said, now I've told you all, do not fail me. And he passed away. So Hal Jordan disposes of Abin Sur's body as he was instructed. He takes the uniform. He vows to carry out his responsibility to the best of his ability. And he tries out his new powers with this ring and this, this thing, this lantern that looks like this battery of power. And he lifts a cliff nearby in the air with the power from this ring. And from then on, whenever he puts on the ring, he has this oath that he speaks that's known as the Green Lantern Oath. In the brightest day and the blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. So one of his superpowers is he can now spit rhymes. What he's doing. So, all right, so the Green Lantern has power over everything except that which is yellow. So, very powerful character unless Tweety Bird is driving a school bus at him, and then he can't do anything about that. He also cannot control his bladder. I think that's fun. So, he's a superhero running around in an adult diaper, and this ring gives him the power to create or construct green things that are made of hard light images. So, hard light constructs. And anything that he can imagine, this ring will create. And so DC Comics Encyclopedia says the Green Lantern ring generates hard light images limited only by the user's imagination. And so the Green Lantern has the ability to form anything he imagines. So you can imagine as an early superhero when he first takes over from Abin Sur, you can imagine that things start off kind of simple, like, okay, anything I can imagine. And so it might be like a fireman's net to rescue someone who's falling from a building. It might be a lasso, if a enemy is trying to escape or a villain is trying to escape, he might lasso them with green energy from the ring. Or a parachute, if you want to jump out of the plane. But as he continues as a superhero and he works his imagination and his creativity with this ring, more and more he becomes a much more powerful superhero. In fact, eventually he realized, if I'm in need of transportation, I can imagine a green jet. And I can take people with me on this jet because I can imagine it and use the power of the ring. Or I could use, if I need to send a message, a warning message to people in a large building that something's going down, I can imagine a microphone with speakers and all the floors. I mean, it's whatever you imagine, and the creativity is, what you're either limited by or what makes you more powerful. In fact, eventually it gets to the point where he's like, man, if I want to leap from one part of the cosmos to another, I can imagine a wormhole. I mean, so it just continues to get bigger and cooler the way that he exercises his creativity. And so the creativity of the person wearing the ring is what makes them a great superhero. And so you need to have a vibrant imagination to be the person who wears this ring, or you're powerless. So I got to thinking, what if Abin Sur crash landed in Northeast Ohio, like say Momentum's backyard? He's like, I'm dying, and I have hot pink skin, and I'm dying. And he searches. I wonder, okay, yeah, if he searched, say, the people of Momentum, or even God's church globally, because it's circled around the earth. But, at Momentum, I think he would find a couple of things that Abin Sur mentions in the comic book. I'm looking for someone who is honest and brave, were kind of the two things that he mentions in the comic book. And I think if you were to search Momentum, you'd find a couple, honest people. That's something we value here. I mean, there's some liars, but, there's some honest people here, too. And good sermon, Dan. Yeah, right. But so I think you'd find that, brave people. Yeah, we have a lot of brave people at Momentum. No doubt you'd find some brave people. But if Abin Sur were dying in our backyard and needed to pass the Green Lantern ring and the battery of power on to someone, would he find some people in our church who were creative enough to be Green Lantern? Who were actively creative enough with whatever they've been given to be like, yeah, I could be a good Green Lantern. I could excel at that. In the series, usually we love the scriptures at Momentum. Scriptures are very important. And so usually verbatim, we're putting scriptures up on the screen. But to kind of switch it up, we were in a deep series going into Easter that was really cool called the Servant Songs. But to switch it up, this series, we're going to be using something called the Action Bible. And if you are someone who is a visual learner, man, this is incredible. written by a Latino dude whose name I can kind of pronounce, Sergio Corello. We're going to go with that. Sergio Corello. But man, it is just jam-packed with amazing art and just basically all the major narratives of the scriptures. And or if you have kids or grandkids and you're like, man, I want to introduce them to God's word. But I know adults that, I think this is really, really cool. And so I know adults who read from this. And it's a great way to just kind of supplement the scriptures and then go in and be like, what does the scriptures actually say verbatim about this story? But that's what we're going to use throughout this, so it'll be a little bit more visual based for this and the next 2 weeks. And so we're going to start with the very beginning in the Action Bible, Genesis chapter 1, where it says, in the beginning, there was nothing except God. Day one, God's Spirit moved through the void. Then God spoke, let there be light. And so in the creation account, you have the Creator creating light and water and sun, moon, stars. Let there be birds and fish and animals. And so these creation accounts, you have a mighty God with the power and the brilliance to design. A bat with biosonar, a chameleon that can change colors. You've got bears that hibernate and birds that migrate in the winter. There's just all this I could go on and on and on about the stuff that you see in fruits and vegetables and animals. Just mind-boggling stuff. So the Creator is very creative, super creative. And then in Genesis 1:26, God says, let us make mankind in our image, a little allusion to the Trinity, 3 persons in one being. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So the way this has been described through the centuries is that we humans are image bearers of God. Like we bear his image in there's some way that we reflect God's image to the rest of creation. And I've preached many sermons on some of the things that means. But we're going to go into kind of a different take on that this morning. And so we reflect that to the rest of creation. In Latin, this doctrine is called Imago Dei, meaning image of God. And then in Genesis 2, verse 7, it says, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Even the way God creates is creative. And so the Creator is very creative. But what does it mean to be made in his image? Well, J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings series, among other things, very creative person, Roman Catholic believer in the 20th century. He believed that one of the ways that God has created us in his image is by making us creative. And that basically Tolkien believed the Creator delights when his children become what he calls sub-creators. So the idea is that God is the only one who can create something from nothing, but he's created this whole world for us with all kinds of materials. And there's wood and precious metals, and there's water, and there's all this, there's numbers, there's all this stuff. And he gives it to us, and that God is pleased when we take the materials that God has given to us and we sub-create things to honor him. That we take whatever way that God has designed us uniquely with interests and talents and abilities and gifts, and we take his materials and we sub-create, and we creatively say, man, I was designed to work with numbers. How can I do that creatively, the best way? I was designed to work, woodworking is my thing. And we take his materials and we sub-create. We become sub-creators, and that's one of the ways we reflect his image to the creation. Now, obviously, we're never going to create a new primary color. We're never going to create a new musical note. We're never going to create a new chemical element for the periodic table. But we have all this stuff that God has given us, and over the years, it just continue to marvel at the, inventions and technology and ways that people create new things for God. So God gives us gifts and abilities and talents and raw materials, and he's like, okay, you have the ability to sub-create. Like, use your imagination and creativity with what you are given, and sub-create to the best of your, construct things to the best of your ability. So what will you subcreate with what God has given you and with the resources put in this world? Back when my family moved to Cleveland in 2005, there's quite a few months before we launched publicly of laying down groundwork, starting Mo groups, and just all this stuff. But I'll never forget, there's this sweet, very kind, very humble minister in the Akron area. I won't say his name. I don't think he'd care. But I was meeting with him one time, and there's a couple other people. And I can't remember if they left early or they went to use the restroom. But at one point, it was just me and him sitting in a booth. And we'd known each other for a few months at this point. And at that point, probably important to mention, I'd had a viral comedy video that went kind of nuts, and it was on CNN and VH1. It was hitting the local news and all that kind of stuff. And he looked across the table at me and he said, have you found, since you've been living in Cleveland, have you still been creative? I was like, what? He's like, do you feel like you've still been like creative? And now if I can translate for you, what I realized he was saying was, has the city that Cleveland is sucked the vacuum of creativity right out of your soul? Like, and you think about 2005, what was going on then? It was like we were still in the midst of the curse, and all this kind of, like we hadn't won a championships in 1965 and all that stuff. And so, I mean, I can't even tell you, moving here from another place, how much we heard and felt people that lived here all their lives. Yeah, I know, Cleveland just sucks, doesn't it? It just sucks so bad. It's like one big toilet. Just on and on and on. Like, no, it's not. Like, it's a great city. There's a lot of great stuff here. We got little kids, great stuff for families. I mean, it was mind-boggling how much people thought Cleveland sucked. And so it's like in the midst of all this curse that was on, does it go beyond sports? Can you not think straight while you're here? Have you lost all your creativity? I kind of giggled. It's like, I see what you're getting at, but no, like I'm kind of working on my second comedy song album right now. It's going well. I don't think, I've been struggling. Like, what is there's a barrier. I don't know what it is. It's this city. But when I answered him, and I was like, no, I don't think so. I feel very creative. It was like he went back to the drawing board in his mind. He went, oh. And it was almost like he was like, so what's my problem? Like, so what else is it? And it was really funny. And so maybe you're kind of in the same place. You're like, Dan, okay, you seem to be talking about imagination and creativity and using my gifts or whatever. But I'm not a creative person. I'm not an artist who stays up till 3 a.m. and sleeps till 2 p.m. I'm not one of those artist types, or whatever. But don't limit it to that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the idea of what you have been given, what you're passionate about. And again, it could be spreadsheets and numbers. It could be organization. It could be those kind. What have you been given by God? And to use his materials to be like, man, I'm going to be as creative as I can to sub-create with what I've been, to construct things that God has built me to construct for his glory. Finley Eversole, in his book, The Politics of Creativity, he has this remarkable study in it where he mentions this. He said, in our society, at the age of 5, so try to track these stats for a second. At the age of 5, 90% of the population measures high creativity. He says, by the age of 7, the figure has dropped to 10%. So from 5 to 7, it goes from 90% to 10%. And the percentage of adults with high creativity, he says, according to the study, is only 2%. Now, I don't know, what the measures were of what is a highly creative person and what they weren't, but taking that at face value, I do think there's a little bit of hope for all of us there, and the hope is this, that creativity is not so much a capacity that we've never had. 98% of us who are like, I don't feel creative at all. It's not so much something we've never had as much as it's something that we've lost. Like, think about what you were like when you were a kid, say 5 years old. Couldn't you tell a great story? Couldn't you imagine, things in a vivid way? When your buddy came over, your friend came over, couldn't you immediately in your mind turn your bed into a race car and get on it and play games and battle enemies and, whatever it was? Like, your imagination was just so vibrant. And I always picture, like, at about 5 years old, like, we go to school, not that it's school's fault necessarily, but we go to school at that age with a full box of 64 brightly colored crayons, and then we leave school with one ink pen. You know, it's like, wow, there's a transition. And it's not like it's school. It's like what happens in this time. And some of it's responsibility and, you know, so suddenly got deadlines and assignments and all this kind of stuff. But somewhere along the way, we start to lose the passion to be creative, the motivation to be creative, to keep our minds alive with creativity. And so it's something that you have to begin to practice again. It's something that you have to say, I need to start sub-creating again. I need to start constructing again. And when you look through the Bible, there's so many examples of Green Lanterns who just say, I'm going to take what God has given me. And most people don't feel like the thing that God has given them is like an extra sexy talent. Like, man, that's a cool talent. You always want what somebody else can do, right? But what has God given you and the materials around you? And, you know, like, for instance, the Israelites who were in covenant with God, meaning they had an agreement with God. We'll be your people. You be our God. We'll listen to you. And we'll trust you to lead us and to save us and all that stuff. And so the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness. They've been rescued by God from slavery in Egypt. There's a long gap of time before they enter the promised land that God has promised them. They're out in the wilderness, and God's like, hey, I got some instructions for you. I would like for you to build something called the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting. And so basically, the tabernacle is a portable worship space. They're out in the wilderness. They don't even have a land. Now, if you know anything about Momentum's history or story at all, we know something about portable worship spaces. If we started meeting in Cinemark in Valley View 2006, met there for 8.5 years, multiplied into 2 campuses, and the other campus met in elementary school. And so we were very portable. We did that very, very well. But in this case, in order to build it, Moses told the Israelites the instructions God had given him, and they're in Exodus 35 and 36. I'm like, okay, we're going to build this thing called the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting. And so he basically sends everybody on their own missions of like, whatever you're gifted to do, do it. Whether it's woodworking, weaving, working with gold, silver, bronze, creating basins, sewing together the priestly garments, engraving, designing, embroidering. And all these people, a whole crew of people, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people just start doing what they're good at and working together. And to lead this construction project, God even singles out 2 people by name who were wise, skilled craftsmen who had artistic ability, but it specifically says had the ability to teach others. So they had the ability to lead. Not only were they gifted in these ways with construction, they had the ability to lead. And so the main guy, the general contractor, we'll say, was from the tribe of Judah. He was from the tribe of Judah, and his name was Bezalel. And his assistant was a dude named Aholiab, who was from the tribe of Dan. And so they were creative designers and builders, and you know, they all put their minds together and they used their gifts, and eventually Moses in Exodus 36:1 calls for every skilled person. Like, no matter what you're good at, like, let's contribute to this construction project that is to honor God, the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And eventually, if you go back to that picture, you know, they get to the final project where, like, it's all come together. And now we got this portable space that when we're ready to move from here, we can wrap it up and then set up camp somewhere else. And we set up our portable worship space, which also doubles as the house of God on earth. Is like God saying, this is where my presence will dwell with you on earth. And so, you know, around here, for some of you that know him, Jeremy Speth is kind of our Bezalel, our general contractor. When we have something that needs to be done here, he's like, okay, let me get some people on this, team on it. Him working with Rachel Gregory, like, okay, we got this to do because, you know, this is like, think of all the house projects you have, you know, it's your house that pop up. You're like, oh, no, that's broken now, you know, with a church building. And probably there's always stuff popping up. And so, man, like, doing that kind of stuff. And we have this team of handymen and at times handy women who have been so clutch, who just show up to do things, you know, when there's a new project or a new broken thing, and just clutch people who use what they've been given to sub-create. And the cool thing is, like, being a part of this, as it was with the tent of meeting, is often like, you know, a lot of times there's people working toward a specific purpose, but it's usually under some leader's authority of like, okay, we gotta figure out which is the best way to do it. Somebody's got to make a call. Let's go with this one, okay? And so it's this teamwork that comes together. And around here, we've got teams of mowers and landscapers and HVAC experts and plumbers and electricians and stage decorators who, for some of our series, will create cool things for the stage, or holiday decorators, or tech-savvy people, or cleaning teams. I mean, all these people using their skills and abilities to pull off something together for teamwork. Lauren Love is an example of an organizational Green Lantern. I don't know if she would say of herself or not, I'm a super creative person. But to be creative with what God has given her as an organizational person, every team needs organizational people. Like, you set her loose with a label maker, and she is a superhero, man. Label, 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 this goes there, and everybody needs that on a team. Like, you got your artist type who are up all night, strumming and picking and all that kind of stuff. She's like, we got to label things, get it in order. And that's just the way the team comes together. And all through Scripture, there's a young shepherd boy named David who apparently, as he's, with sheep out in the field, is like writing poems and songs and prayers to God to honor God. And he also plays an instrument, a harp, or at that time a lyre, the stringed instrument. And he plays these songs, and he uses those artistic skills to love God. He sings and writes these songs and these lyrics to God. But he also uses those songs in honor of God to love people. There's a time where the first king of Israel, King Saul, is tormented. It seems it's a spiritual tormenting that's going on. And someone's like, hey, I know this dude named David who plays, and he loves God. And next thing you know, they bring in David to the king. And they're like, hey, man, don't look the king in the eye. He's kind of a crazy dude, man. He's one taco short of a combo meal. And so he just ends up playing to soothe him. And he uses his music in some way to minister to King Saul spiritually through his music. And he uses music to love God and love people. And we got a bunch of people around Momentum that do that too, like vocalists and instrumentalists and, tech people. I mean, it just goes on and on of how can I use this? Just do my best to sub-create with what I've been given. Use my creativity to the best of my ability to be a Green Lantern. There's a lady named Tabitha in Acts chapter 9 who, again, I can only speculate, but with what she's given, maybe she's like, how can I use this to honor God in any way? And what she did was she could make clothes. And she made clothes, and she was probably like, I can make some nice stuff for myself, but how could I ever serve God with this? But eventually, I think one day she figured it out, and she was like, well, I could make clothes for people who can't afford clothes, poor people, maybe in the story it seems to allude to maybe even widows. And so she makes clothes, and she's called a disciple, a follower, a student, an apprentice of Jesus. Acts chapter 9 says, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. Now in Greek, she has an unfortunate name. In Greek, it's translated Dorcas. But she got beyond that in her life. She overcame that obstacle. She said, hey, call me Tabs, okay? So she was always doing good and helping the poor, making robes and other clothing. And so she was like, here's what I've been given. Does that sound like some crazy creative type? Maybe, maybe not, And so Jesus, he showcased God's abilities by creating and telling creative stories. I don't think they were fed to him with an Ethernet cable from the Father in heaven. I think he had to construct these stories in free time that he had and think, how do I tell people how much God is chasing after them and loves them? What if it was a guy who ran away from home, partied it up, just did what he thought was winning, and just went out and did stupid stuff, but then hit rock bottom. And when he comes home, the Father runs out to meet him and hug him. Instead of being rejected and angry, the Father's just so grateful, happy to see that his son is alive and coming home. What if I told a story like that to communicate how God feels about them? And so it just goes on and on and on. And the Bible says that every follower of Jesus is given a spiritual gift, some things often, that you can use, a gift, but you can use it for spiritual purposes to love God and love others. And they're not just artistic gifts, but they're things like serving others. Some people just have the gift to serve. Have you ever noticed that? Man, they're noticing the needs in the room, and I often feel like the idiot who's like, oh, I didn't even see her fall down. And then somebody's already over there doing things like, man, that person has the gift of serving others. Administration is one of them. That's not creative. Man, you can be very creative in learning how to organize and to administrate. And so Scripture teaches us, Romans 12 says, for just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, not everybody gets to be a soloist, is kind of not everybody gets to do that. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Isn't that interesting? Like, my gift isn't just given for me. My gift is given to me to be given away, and it's for the others. And so one of the things we've done to make this kind of helpful, because I know there's kind of like a cookie cutter of teams that we have inside the church, and serving in the community is huge and vital. Inside the church, you might be like, well, I'm not a stage person. I'm not a tech person. I don't like greeting people. I generally tend to push people down. I don't like making coffee. I don't even know the recipe. Whatever it is, like I'm not good at the things that I see happening. Then we have this QR code that we'll put on the screen where you can kind of tell us, like, okay, maybe there are a couple teams I'm interested in, or here are the things that I'm good at that aren't on a list. To be like, hey, when the need comes up for blank, here's something I could help with, because we don't have a big website design team, but we need website help for sure. Those different things that it could be baking, it could be anything like that. Like I got a really good Irish accent that I can do. Like, man, we'll use that sometime. We'll use that. It's an Irish theme today, isn't there? Yeah, just noticed that. It wasn't written in there. It just happened. But undoubtedly, when you look through the Bible, there's another thing you see, and I love that Scripture's honest about this, is that there are a lot of people who have gifts who don't necessarily give them to God to be like, okay, God, how can I use this for your glory? There's a lot of that too. In Genesis 11, relatively not long after the creation, undoubtedly many creative geniuses contributed to this awe-inspiring display that was called the Tower of Babel. And it explicitly talks about this tower that's built by people. And, in this story, it specifically says the purpose of the tower for those creative people was to, quote, make a name for themselves, otherwise known as, this will bring us glory. Like, people will look and be like, look what they did. Look how awesome this thing is. And so people can create things or do things that really are about creating their own glory or comfort, or whatever it is, just creating their own happiness, whatever that is. There's an example in Matthew 14 where a young woman uses a creative and lewd dance where she comes out, she dances for a bunch of dudes who are drinking, and they're all like, whoa, girl, you're so fine. You look so good. I love that voodoo that you do. And she's dancing and all that. And she basically gets one of the guys to say, I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom. What do you want, girl? I mean, she's that good of a dancer, okay? And then she is like, okay, Mom, take the mic. And she hands the mic to Herodias, a woman who wants to see John the Baptist dead. And she says, oh, here's our request. We'd like his head on a platter. And so her creativity, along with her mom, they together came up with this plan that was, served a destructive end through something that was extremely creative. And so I think one of the things we learn looking through Scripture also is that God-given creativity in itself is not an end in and of itself. That creativity is given to us as a gift so that we can serve God and others. And this is, every person who has a gift is going to wrestle with this over and over and over, because when you have a gift, absolutely you can make a career out of that gift. That's not wrong. That's not bad. Absolutely you can have that gift to use as a hobby because it can bring you joy and delight. Absolutely. That's not wrong. But to remember, the number one priority of a reason I've been given a gift is to somehow figure out, how do I love God and others through this gift? How do I love God and people? And for some of us, that's going to take some connecting the dots. How in the world do I use my skills under the hood of a car to love God and others? Man, single moms need oil changes, It's figuring out, okay, and sometimes it takes some, thinking, well, how do I do something? How do I do an event where single moms get oil changes? How do I, It's going to take some people. It's going to take someone with a label maker. It's going to take some administrative skills. It's going to take some of those people that can't greet but might push somebody down. But instead of doing that and greeting, they might work under the hood of a car or know how to do something. And so it takes, but to constantly think, it's not just for my career. It's not just for my hobby, for my enjoyment. How do I use this? Because my stuff doesn't just belong to me, these gifts. How can I sub-create for the glory of God? And looking at the Tower of Babel and the pride of like, we'll make a name for ourselves, it's always good to just constantly be reminded. I have to humbly acknowledge that this creativity comes from God so that I can be a sub-creator. And a great thing to constantly remind yourself is just constantly list, who are you in debt to that got you to the point where you were this creative? That you know the skills you have. It could be a 5th grade teacher. It could be a baseball coach. It could be mom. It could be dad. It could be grandpa. I mean, there's a list of people. So when you start getting like, man, the thing I do, isn't it cool? I'm suddenly better than all the people around me doing that thing. Yeah, but you owe your mama for that. Like there are people that you should be an appreciation to. Mark Twain once said, originality is forgetting who you stole it from. It's like, man, don't get too puffed up about this, because this comes from people who have invested in you. Over the years, there have been many Green Lanterns. Hal Jordan was the first, but not the last. A guy named Guy Gardner. One of them literally was named Jon Stewart. And that one was when he wasn't hosting The Daily Show. He was one of DC's first black superheroes, Jon Stewart was. And then there was Simon Baz, who was a Lebanese immigrant who resides in Dearborn, Michigan, which that just cracks me up. He's in Dearborn. Like, okay, you came to America, best you got is Dearborn. And then I wonder if people in Dearborn are like, can you not be creative anymore? You're in Dearborn. Have you lost creativity? Yeah, I can't be the Green Lantern. My imagination sucks in Dearborn. Then Jessica Cruz. I thought that was more fun in my mind and heart than it was. When I said it out loud, people just looked at me like, just move along. Just move along. But then Jessica Cruz, a female Green Lantern. But one of the coolest Green Lanterns is someone named Kyle Rayner, who, he was a really gifted freelance comic book artist, kind of struggling, but really gifted. And so he's a cartoonist, graphic designer, very visually artistic. And when the Green Lantern ring came to him, man, it was like the ultimate expression of his imagination. So while he was in battle, he would do crazy imaginative stuff with the Green Lantern ring, and he was able to construct just about anything his artistic mind could come up with. He would be in a battle, and he would imagine with his Green Lantern rings other superheroes to be in the battle with him. Like, that's really cool. And so he would imagine anime characters and mystical characters and futuristic weapons and original characters from his own comic books he had created. A giant robot that he could get in and control as a humanoid walking vehicle. I mean, he just took things to a next level with his imagination and creativity for the ability to construct and to take that kind of sub-creation to the next level. And one of the things I always think has been fun with these superhero stories is, whether it's Spider-Man in the Marvel universe or people in the DC Comics universe, often what you see is when someone is given these abilities in some way or another, there's kind of this unspoken code among these superheroes that if you're given special gifts and abilities, your life is no longer your own. And sometimes it takes like a Spider-Man, making some money as a semi-pro wrestler, the story, before he becomes Spider-Man. So they'll struggle with it, but then pretty soon, like, man, I've been given this for a reason. Like, my life's not my own. And I think one of the coolest things about what God teaches us is like, man, when you've experienced the love of God, like when you really get your mind around that Jesus died on the cross to purchase us, to rescue us from slavery to self and sin, but not just to rescue you and bring you into another slavery, because what, he purchased us? Yeah, but it's like he purchased us out of slavery so that he can adopt us into God's family. Like, and when you see that, you're like, man, my response to God's love, the natural response is to love God and to love others because of how I've been loved by God. And once that happens and you realize, man, these gifts are gifts given to me to be given away, man, my life is not my own. Like, I have to use my abilities to sub-create and be as creative as I can to give what I have for the sake of others. Jason Campbell, who's drawn today, um, he started coming to Momentum through his mom, Angie Campbell, years ago, right when Momentum was a brand new thing. And she had not been to church for several years. I remember once in Mo Group, she opened up the cover of her Bible and she pulled out a program from a church. She was like, man, she saw the date on it. She was like, it has been so long since I've been to church. I cannot believe the years that it's been. Like, look at this. And, whatever the date was, I was like, wow. But I'll never forget, one of the things we did serving as a church together was every once in a while we used to, for a day or two, rent an ice cream truck, just send it through the neighborhoods giving out free ice cream. And kids would come running, ice cream, come running, or whatever. And a lot of times kids thought it was a lie. Like come up like, we got free ice cream, bing, bing, ding, 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 free ice cream and all that kind of stuff with that hi-fi system, sounds dope, or whatever. Like, so turn down for what? It was not that. And so come through free ice cream, kids that come around like, what? Is it really free? Like, yeah, what do you want? Here, go take it. I don't have to pay anything? No. It really is free. And then more kids would come and parents would come out like, did my kids steal this? No, it's free. And so Angie Campbell was like the first service project she was in that I remember. And she signed up to be one of the people in the truck giving out free ice cream to kids. And it was mostly at that time in Garfield Heights. And so she was in the window giving out free ice cream. And she's just being Angie Campbell, this fun Puerto Rican woman who in the worship service, worshiping her heart out in the community, serving like crazy, just awesome. And I remember during that project, somebody looked at Angie Campbell and was like, Angie, you haven't been to church in years. What the flip have you been doing for the last, say, 10, 15 years? I can't imagine you doing anything but worshiping the way you worship and serving the way you serve. And she was like, man, I don't know. I guess I really don't know who I was before this, for the last several years. And she goes, I guess I wasn't really living. And when you think about that, there is something about when you're just like, God, what can I sub-create, but not just for my glory, not just so I can earn a living, not just for my happiness, but to remember ultimately it's to be given back to you, to love you and love others, to serve you and serve others. You will look back and you'll be like, man, before I was doing that for God, to bring God glory with my administrative skills and my label making and my playing of the guitar and my loving kids and students, I wasn't truly living. Don't leave here saying, oh man, don't leave here without saying, I got to figure out how to put the Green Lantern ring to use. I got to learn how to sub-create, rediscover what you've lost, exercise your imagination, use your sub-creating ability to love God, love people, and make disciples to make disciples. Let's pray.